Hello once again and welcome to my beginner tutorial on how to create a Halo Custom Edition map. This is probably the most important beginner tutorial I've done so far, since this is the one where I show you how to go from this to this. We're going to go from those little boxy maps to something that actually resembles an arena or an indoor facility or stuff like that. We're also going to cover a little bit on lighting that indoor facility, since without a sky you're going to need alternative forms of lighting. There are a ton of techniques here, and trying to demonstrate all of them in one video won't work out too well, so I'm going to separate this into two longer videos, as well as a bunch of shorter quick notes videos. You can check those out as well on my channel. They're basically all these sections from my longer videos, but separated into a single video each. You can also click the buttons here to go to the sections of this video and the next longer video. So I wanted to limit myself to the beginner modeling techniques only. However, the kind of intermediate, I guess you'd call them, techniques really aren't that much more difficult to grasp, but they are a lot faster and produce what I think are better looking results. So I'm going to show you the beginner techniques, since you're going to need at least those basics. But I'm also going to introduce a couple of intermediate level techniques so that you can start right away making really nice looking maps. For those of you who are new at modding, I'm going to cover something for you guys, not right now, new at modeling, new at 3D Studio Max. This is for you. If you've already used this program before, you can go ahead and skip to the first section where I'll start with actually modifying a map. But for those of you who are new to all this, you should stick around, because there are a lot of terms I'm going to be using in this tutorial that you're going to need to know. So let's begin. I'm going to start with our simple box like before. The first thing you're going to need to grasp is surface normals. We see our box here with these edges pointing out. I'm going to change this to a better color for what we're about to do. And you know from my previous lessons that the next step is to convert it into a mesh, select all the polygons, and flip them, and then backface call. And this is our standard box map. But what we're going to do today involves complex shapes, so you're going to need to understand some rules that Halo makes you follow. One of them is that you need to have all your normals facing the same direction. You can imagine a normal as an arrow that points out of the surface of a polygon. So all the arrows would be pointing inside for this box. And that's really the way you want it for any map you make in Halo. If we were to say, take this edge, and you see this says normals, so now you understand what that means. If we were to flip this, this map would not compile, because this normal is facing the other way. And you can check all your normals. If you select, actually you don't even need to select that. Just click with polygon selected, click show normals. And when you click on a polygon, you'll see these blue lines, and those are those arrows I was telling you about. And you'll see, if I select all these polygons right here, all of these have normals facing inside, and that's correct. But this one has it facing outside. So like I said, that won't compile. We need to fix that. This seems kind of obvious when you have something that only has 6 sides, but believe me, if you have something like that, it's a bit harder to tell. Especially if we were to make this really, really tiny, which may in fact happen in your maps. As you get more and more complex, you might have smaller and smaller polygons. So let's say we had some kind of weird ceiling, and then we had just that one flipped. Well, you're looking around your level, and you just see this weird shape, and you're like, well, what is that? It's stuff like this that could break your map. So you need to make sure that everything is facing the right direction. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, you need to make sure that your map is basically emulating real life. In real life, you would never have a wall just intersect another wall. like phasing in and out of it. So this would be a big, bad mistake, and it also wouldn't compile. We have this wall intersecting this wall, and that's an even worse mistake. And you can see this level's all twisted up and stuff, and it just won't compile. So make sure your walls are behaving like you'd expect walls to in real life. Make sure that your surfaces are all facing the same inward direction. And finally, you need to make sure that there aren't just blatant holes in your walls, in anything in your map actually. So if I were to select this face right here and just delete it, that's not a wrong facing normal, and from this angle you can't even detect it. However, a big hole in your map is going to cause problems. So to review, you need to have all your normals facing the same direction, all your surfaces, and that direction's usually inward, since we're making our maps and we're having our characters inside this map. You want to make sure that they aren't overlapping or intersecting each other, and you want to make sure that there are no holes in your surfaces. You need to keep these 3 principles in mind when you're making your map, otherwise you're going to run into errors and it's going to cause you a huge headache. So here we have our standard box map. Backface call, editable mesh, all normals facing inward like we've just covered. And we're going to start modifying it to be a little bit better than a simple box. As you know from previous tutorials or just using 3D Studio Max, you can move objects just along these axes or in multiple axes at once. And you can scale them and rotate them and all that good stuff. However, you may not know, you can also do this to each individual sub-object. So each polygon can be rotated, scaled, moved, and you can really do this to whatever kind of shape you want. So you see, without much effort, I've completely changed it from a box map to a sort of weird baseball diamond kind of thing. You can also do this to each individual face if you so choose, and to each vertex. So you can really control a lot about how your map looks just from what's given to you right from the start. And if you need more control over each part, make sure you check your wireframe too. What you can do is, before you change it into an editable mesh, let's create another box here. You can see in the Create tab, when you create a box, you can change the number of segments here in order to give yourself more control. So if I were to take this and make it an editable mesh, I now have even more control over how it looks. But let's say you already built your map like we have in our little diamond-like thing here, and you want to adjust part of it, but this has already been made. You don't want to add length segments onto a box. You've already built the box. Well, what you do is you go over to tessellate, and you want to change this down to 0. I'll show you what happens if you do 25. You can see it's stretched out on the edges here. So I'm going to undo that and change it to 0. And now if you go into wireframe mode, be sure to press the button, tessellate. Now you'll see that instead of this side, which is just flat, I now have basically 4 individual squares, and I can adjust those as I see fit. And you can tessellate each individual triangle or square as well. Don't get too crazy with this, because my computer might be able to handle it, but yours can't, or the person who playing your map can't, etc. You want to make sure you do something reasonable. And at a certain point, Halo can't handle it either. This is already 197,000 faces. So you don't want to go too crazy with it. I'm going to undo all this, in fact. There we go. Now we're going to work on adding hallways, bases, and tunnels using a couple tools here, because places have hallways, and I assume that you're going to want to build one at some point in your map. So let's select a wall here. Let's tessellate it down a bit. Always remember you can check your wireframe to see how that tessellation is working out. And I'm just going to adjust the vertices here to make it a little bit more square. There, that's better. So I'm going to select these two. Let's use rotation to make this a little bit more flat in the wall. Okay. In order to make a tunnel out of this wall, or a hallway out of a base, or whatever you want to call it, we're going to go over to the top right corner right here and click Extrude. And there are two ways you can do this. You can activate Extrude, where you'll see this selected as blue, and then click and drag on the faces you want, and you'll see that nice tunnel forming. Or you can type in a number here, like 100. You'll see that extruded the opposite direction. Or you can simply click and move up and down. And I like this method a lot more because I can see what I'm doing, and if you end up scrolling past the bottom of your screen, you end up going back to the top. It's a very nice 3D Studio Max trick. So I can end up stretching it a lot more than I could clicking on the actual polygon. So I'm going to put our tunnel this deep in. Along with my conversation on normals and how they all have to face the same side and all those, the 3 rules, do not extrude a tunnel backwards through itself. Because if you do something like this, it's going to create all sorts of nastiness. You see, we got normals facing the wrong way here. We got multiple edges here. It's really a nightmare. So just don't do that. Oh. Remember that you can combine your tools pretty effectively in situations like this. Right now I'm going to turn the outermost face of this tunnel right here. Then I'm going to go to extrude, and I'm going to extrude it again. And this is a quick way of getting a curved tunnel. So I'm just going to keep on extruding. I think that's about good. And we have over here, if I can get my zoom working, our base. Or rather, how about we make this a field? And I'll show you right now how to make a base into this field. Let's click on the ground. Again, let's tessellate it a couple times. Edge versus face center doesn't matter. It's really up to what you want to do. I used edge because it gives you the squares, which I wanted for a square tunnel. Let's try face center now. And you'll see it gives you this weird, more flower or star-like pattern. That's not exactly what I want for a base either. I do want the squares. So I'm going to go back to edge, tessellate it by edge, and just keep doing that until I get a nice square area. I think this is about as close as I can get. Right about here. If you're wondering, yes, this is a very inefficient way of getting a square into a flat surface, but I'm going to cover a couple things before I show you the simple and good-looking way of doing it without adding a bunch of triangles into your flat surfaces. So first, let me just demonstrate these simple tools, and then we'll go into adding geometry like that into a plane. So let's bevel this now. And just like with the extrude tool, you can click on here and click on it, or use the numbers or use the arrows. I'm going to click on it right here to show you. It's basically like extrude, except that once you've extruded it, it also allows you to change the size of the top. You can emulate this just by using the scale tool and the extrude tool together, I find. But sometimes it's easier just to have control over it like this. So there's our little base you can imagine in the middle of a field. And we can give it a little door if we wanted to even. I usually recommend all the time, don't forget to scale your maps. I'm not scaling this one since it's only for a demonstration. So you're just going to have to use your imagination on to the use of doors and such. So there. Super quick, kind of ugly base, but you get the point. When you're building your map, you can go ahead and use the things you just learned, move the vertexes, make it look more square or whatever. But this is really a super fast way of getting a base into a field. Finally, this is a lot less terrain changing as it is for decoration, I find. But you also might want to, for some corners or whatever, you might want to chamfer your edges. And you'll see that instead of bevel, when we had polygon selected, when we have edge selected, we now have chamfer where bevel was. And what that's going to do is it's going to create two edges parallel to each other where that one edge previously was. This is kind of sensitive here, but you can see the effect it's having. I need to click out of it and just change it by number, I think, because it's really sensitive on that. There we go. So you'll see, instead of having these really sharp corners, now you have that. And I'll change this one as well, so you can get a really interesting looking base. And it's worth noting you can also chamfer vertexes. So if you see where this vertex meets at a point right here, you can even soften that up. Do believe I accidentally cut. You want to make sure you don't accidentally poke holes in your map when doing this. So I'm going to just leave it like that. But you can see this is also helpful if you want to, now we have a triangle here that we can mess with along with all that. So it's not a very good looking base, but it is something that just demonstrates all the tools you can use for whatever you want. Okay, here's where I start to branch off into my own style a bit. I'm going to demonstrate a simple and a complex example of merging two level areas together. To start, let's take the map we already made and copy it by holding Shift and then moving it. Make sure this is set to copy. Now I'm going to take this and rotate it. Let's put angle snap on so I can rotate it exactly 180 degrees. I'm going to move it so that the two tunnels are right next to each other. Go ahead and fix my zoom right here. Okay. That's about close enough, I'd say. Let's go back. And you'll see, because I copied it, I'm not going to be able to click on any of these. I'm only in the copy. So what I want to do, since we only want to export this one structure as one level, going to attach this, and we're going to click on the other object. And now these are both the same object. And I can click on both. In order to attach these tunnels together, I need these walls out of the way. So let's delete these. Fix my zoom again. Okay. So with that done, we're left with part of a tunnel, a hole, and another part of a tunnel. Let me make sure, yeah, that's off. Okay. And of course, as you know, we can't have any holes in our map. It will yell at us and scream. So here's the first method, and this is the one that you're going to hear a lot around Halo mapping, because it's definitely something you need to know. It's something that I hate doing, but sometimes you're left with no choice. I've developed a couple better techniques for doing it that I think I've seen a couple people do, but it's not really as well known. So first, let's start with this. With your Modify tab, you want to select Polygon. You want to go over to your Edit Geometry section and click Create. You're going to see all these vertexes in your map. They're going to be blue. So in fact, let's change the mesh color so it's just easier to see. Let's change it to, I believe yellow is the complement of blue, or whatever they call it, so you can see it better. There we go. So when I click Create, there you go. So all these blue dots right here. Start from one of these vertexes. Click and you'll see this little string follow your cursor now. While that's happening, go over to your next vertex in counterclockwise order and click on them. You want to make sure they're in order, and you'll see this red line appear on each edge as you're doing it. When you get to the last vertex right before where you started, double click on that. And you'll see yourself with a nice new face in between the two. A nice new polygon, rather. Same thing, same difference. Right here. You want to continue this pattern throughout each of the holes, moving about 4 vertexes at a time, or more if your tunnel is really complex. But you want to basically do it a side at a time, always working counterclockwise. This is why I don't really like working with it, however. You'll see I made a mistake. I believe I either missed a vertex or clicked weird or whatever. And now I have this. Watch out for that. I'm just going to delete that right now. Or not. So every time you create it, everything gets selected and it keeps getting selected. So I'm going to right click out of it, select this one messed up polygon, delete that. There we go. So I'm going to zoom back in, orient myself a bit. And let's keep going. If you do it the wrong way, say you do it clockwise, all that's going to happen is you're going to make it right, but it's going to be, the normals are going to face wrong. So just click on it and flip the normal. So with that in mind, like I said, watch your normals. I seem to be talking about it a lot, but it is a huge deal. You'll get errors that aren't actually errors if you don't do this right, because it'll say there are open edges or multiple edges or stuff like that, when really all it is you have something backwards, because what it doesn't treat it right. And what's annoying is that you can actually get all the way to the tool step without the exporter complaining about it or anything like that. So Just make sure they're done right. By the way, if you want to get out of your create tool, you can just right click. This is the same for most tools in 3D Studio Max. Just right click. So even if you're in the middle of creating something, you can just right click. If you already have 3 points done though, it will finish those points, as you can see. And that's something you need to be aware of because we have backface colon, you might not notice you've created a mistake over here. So just make sure you don't do anything like that and delete any mistakes you created out here. But that's the process. You'll see we now have our tunnel, and this should export just fine. And we now have a map twice the size with a nice tunnel connecting them. But you may have sensed a tone of disdain in my voice when I was doing this because, well, as you noticed, there are so many problems that can occur. You do it the wrong way, the normals are wrong, you miss a vertex, you create a problem that you got to deal with. So many issues with it. What if you have something with 1 billion vertexes? You're supposed to click on each individual one to draw a polygon between them? No. So let's rip this back apart. If you happen to have something that perfectly matches, like we do here with our 4 and 4, this is kind of hard to zoom in on correctly. Let's do this wireframe. We're going to move these edges really close to each other. All right. And just adjust them so that they're really close. And be sure to do that with the upper edge as well. And the other edges should move appropriately. Okay. Now the reason we did this is because they're so similar, we can just weld the vertices together. So I'm going to go to our vertex selector. I'm going to select 2 vertexes. Make sure ignore backfacing is off so you can select both. I'm not sure if that affects vertexes, but sometimes you can't even see them, so I just whatever. Let's see. Alright, it's fine. Just make sure that only the 2 vertexes you want are selected. You can see that there, the vertices, rather. And you can try 2 different vertex weld styles. I usually just do weld selected and make sure this is a decent number, and then I click it. And what happens is they weld together. They become the same vertex. And so I go over here and do the same, weld selected, and I can even select 4 at a time and weld it. And if we look, our tunnel is welded together, and there's no extra geometry. We didn't have to create 4 new polygons to do it. There are times when you can't do this, of course. Obviously, when you're not merging 2 symmetric objects, you're going to need to do something else. But for quick stuff like this, compared to creating polygons together, let me show you how quick it is. I just select the entire tunnel, click weld selected, and you're done. I find that a bit better for symmetric things. But you're saying, what about unsymmetric things, or asymmetric rather? Asymmetric. Let's rip this back apart. And let's Control Z all the way back to here so they're far apart. And let's mess with it a little bit. Let's see if I can get away with breaking this edge a bit. Okay, so there you go. I just clicked edge and then divide, which gives it a couple more edges. So now we have all these vertexes here. Well, we can't really weld that anymore because now we have these vertexes here and they have nothing to match up to. Well, here's where something that I personally prefer, this is my preferred method for pretty much anything, comes into play. So what you want to do is right click and convert the whole thing into an editable poly. An editable poly is like an editable mesh, except you can do more advanced things with it, and it uses more advanced tools, and it's what I use for everything I model that isn't Halo. The reason I don't use it for Halo all the time is because Halo's old. It doesn't like editable polys. It only likes editable meshes. I want to say for maps. For scenery, you can use editable poly because it's not dealing with structures. But for structures, it really doesn't like dealing with this. So I want to say that, but I've never built scenery with editable poly. Regardless, either way, you're able to convert it back into an editable mesh at any point. So as long as you haven't done something ridiculously complex, you can temporarily switch between the two to get what you need done. Just make sure you export it as a mesh and not a poly. Otherwise, you will get a ton of errors because Halo doesn't know how to handle it. Okay, so with our mesh, with our poly, click on edge, and now you'll see all these edit edges tools right here, which we didn't have before. So I'm going to click here and then select the next edge. I'm going to select all the edges here. I'm going to hit bridge. And what that's just done is created all those polygons for us. And it looks perfectly flat. So I'm going to select the other edges and do the same. And this is a nice way, hit bridge, and boom. This is a nice way of building those polygons up without having to move them close. And as you saw, without even having them to be symmetrical. You can do this with any length of an area. So let's select polygon. Let's destroy this again because we like showing off here that if we select these edges, I'm going to change my selection mode. Don't be afraid to play around with these. They're really nice. What I just changed it to is from window crossing. Now whenever I select something, it has to be completely within the rectangle. When I hit bridge now, you'll see that problem happen. This is something I wanted to show off. When using bridge, just make sure you do it 2 or 3 at a time at most. So let's link these two bridge. Oops. Let's link these two bridge, and then these guys. I should be able to bridge. Oh, I actually can't see. I should be aware of that. There we go. Sometimes wireframe is harder to see. You can also use the bridge tool, just clicking on it and then click, and then just like you were creating things with the polygon. So I just bridged that by clicking on one edge to the other. And there you go. I think it's a really neat tool. Now the reason I introduced that tool is because when you start getting into complex intersecting objects such as this guy right here, let's say we didn't want this ugly old base here. We wanted something else here. Well, see how many ways it's just intersecting into the ground here? I mean, that's a really complex ground. If we wanted to add something right here, we'd have to break open these edges, put something here, and then reattach it from, let's see how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 different little vertices right here, as well as however many vertices we wanted to put our base right here. That's terrible. And I hate to say, but I've done that before when I didn't know more advanced techniques. It's error prone. You're going to be here all day. So I'm going to show you a much better way of doing that. Okay, so now we're going to start working on adding some intersecting geometry, such as a base or a pillar or stuff like that, basically, without pulling it out of the ground and without having to tessellate or anything like that, in a very neat way. We have ourselves our backface call edit mesh box that we've started with a million times before. This time we have this guy for scale because we are actually going to be finishing this map. So let's make it a good size. That's a decent area, I suppose. And let's say we wanted to give this guy a base right in this wall right here. Well, there's a couple ways I see of doing it. Let's start with a box outside here, though. Let's change it to an actual box, not a cube. Okay. Now, while this box is like this, I'm going to place this inside of our map right here, thus intersecting geometry. So that means the normals are all fine right now, because when I put them inside here, they're going to be facing towards the player, which is correct. So while it's out here, let's convert it to a mesh. And let's just add some stuff to it, shall we? Let's chamfer this edge a little bit. Let's take this and break it down a little bit. This guy's tiny, so let's break these guys down some more. And that's about a decent size, but still pretty big door, but that's cool. What we're going to do now is extrude it inside to give ourselves a little doorway. It's worth noting, doing something like this into the edge of something will give you this tiny little flat piece. That's going to be a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. There we go. And since this will be in the wall, let's delete these back sides. I'm not going to build the interior of the base because that's really going to take a while, and it's really up to you as to what you want in it. But this is our basic base shape. In fact, let's give it a couple nice little windows or something up here. Yeah, that's good. I'll just extrude that inside as well. And because this isn't on an edge, this is fine. It won't be causing any problems at the bottom. Okay. It's a quick little base kind of shape here. Let's move this thing into where we want it. And make sure that the bottom and the back are going through the walls. And you'll see why. Usually you don't want that, right? But you'll see why in a moment. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit to the like that. It is called intersecting geometry. Go over here to your compound objects. Now that you have that, click Boolean. Make sure this thing has backface call. I'm going to leave it off just to show you what happens, because I know what's going to happen to one of you guys, and I don't want you to freak out if you forget backface call. So I'm just going to leave it off for now, but remember to do that. With your compound object Boolean, what this is going to do is it's going to join these two objects together based on some parameters down here. Operation. There's a couple things you could do. Subtraction would cut out where they intersect. Intersection would leave in when they intersect. All that stuff. We want to put them together, so we clearly click Union and then pick operand B. And you can see the operands if we name these better. This is box 01. This is box 02. So we want to pick operand B to join these two together. And this is what happens if you don't have backface call. So if you see this happen to your map, don't freak out. Just remember it copies properties from both objects. So one of them had it off, so now both have it off. But now you're good. And now I know you're wondering why we didn't attach it instead of Boolean. Well, what you see here is that when you Boolean attach them, or Boolean union them rather, it's going to create this edge where they intersect automatically. And it wouldn't normally have that if we just clicked attach. If you just click attach, they just are one object. But because we did that operation, now they're together. So when we start patching them together, we don't have to worry about creating a new edge, which is something I like. So convert this whole thing to an editable poly first. And what you want to do is click border, and you can see it's got this big old border here. Now, what the border is for 3D Studio Max is any open edges. So if you have a border to begin with, that's bad usually. And you can see that's open, it's touching nothing else, so that's bad. We want to make sure when we're done that we have no borders on our level here. No geometric borders, rather. So the first thing we're going to do, for your base, since you're going to have an interior, it's really up to you how complex you want this to be. I don't want anything back here, so I'm going to select my polygon, and I'm just going to delete this inside polygon right here. I'm going to do that to here as well. I have ignore backfacing off, so I'm able to select those. And now I want to delete these. Oops. I want to leave that on, however. Okay. This is a good way of showing off stuff, I suppose. I'm just doing edged faces. Okay, so now I want to go over to here, and I want to start deleting out all these parts that are outside of my level. You can see some of these are double parts right here. And this is something not possible if we just did, well, not possible by that easily, if we just did attach. So we can see some issues with the ground here. I guess I didn't attach it as well. Yeah, these parts weren't touching the ground. That's fine, I suppose. It'll be harder to deal with, but that's fine. I'm just going to select all these and then, change my selection method back.